Right, good morning everybody to the meeting of the Planning Policy and Built Heritage Working Party on Monday the 22nd of February. Just one or two housekeeping points. If people can mute when not speaking, which I think most of you are, which is good. And those who are not members of the Working Party, if they can turn off their video link, unless of course they're addressing the meeting later on. It would help if you could use your electronic hand raising function, if at all possible, unless otherwise directed. For the benefit of everybody, we have officers Emma Denny and Linda Yaron from Democratic Services to help with the conduct of the meeting this morning. So turning to the agenda, if I can ask Emma, are there any apologies for absence? I believe there are.
If I can ask Linda to do that, because she has been dealing with that.
I beg your pardon. Yes, Linda, please.
Thank you. Yes, this morning we have apologies from Councillor Adams with Councillor Varley as substitute and from Councillor Dixon with Councillor Fredericks as substitute. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. Do we have any public questions?
There are no public questions this morning.
Thank you very much. So if we move to the minutes of the previous meeting on the 18th of January, pages 1 to 5 of the papers in front of you. Do we have any questions or comments on, if we go through them page by page, on page 1, on page 2, page 3, page 4, and finally page 5. Any questions or comments at all? Don't believe there are. No. If I propose these as a true and accurate record, can I have a seconder? Councillor Grove Jones, thank you very much. Can I ask everyone to raise their hand in favour of adopting these minutes? Thank you. I think that's unanimous, Linda, on that. So moving to item 4, any items of urgent business? Linda?
I'm not aware of any, thank you.
Not aware of any. And item 5, declarations of interest. Does anyone here today on the Working Party have any interests, pecuniary or non-pecuniary, to declare? No, I don't see any. Thank you very much. Item 6, update on matters from the previous meeting. I think, Mark, we referred to a possible item in future on Article 4 directions. I presume that that's sort of still in the pipeline for a future meeting.
Yeah, I made a note to do something, but it'll be coming back later on in the year.
Yeah, fine, excellent, thank you. Right, so we move to item 7, which is the first of 3 agenda items dealing with the development and progress of the local plan. So this is draft policy HOU 1, which is the not unimportant topic of housing targets. So if I may hand over to the Planning Policy Manager, Mr. Mark Ashwell.
So the report starts on page 7, documents that have been circulated. There's a recommendation on the top of page 7, which I'll refer to later on. And there's a revised version of policy HOU 1, which is a housing target policy. That's on pages 17 and 18 of your agenda. So I'll refer to that as I go through. Now, what I'm going to do as normal is I'm not going to read through the entirety of the printed report. You've obviously got that. It's a very lengthy appendix attached with all of the representations that we've received on that particular policy. I'm not going to go through all of that in lots of detail, but what I will try and do is just sort of summarise the sort of key areas and finalise by repeating the recommendation. As the chair has already alluded to, this is one of the key policies in the local plan. I know planning officers are fixated with housing numbers, but it is one of the core policies. It will be subject to lots of scrutiny at the examination, and depending on the approach we take today, might even get national attention, and perhaps I'll explain why that might be the case when I return to the recommendation. But it's a really important policy to get right. So I'm going to say something first about the housing target and its purpose and what it does. So all local plans must have a housing target, a numeric target for the number of homes to be delivered. And as well as an overall target, they must also include a separate target for affordable housing. So there's a big number, and then part of that big number is a separate target for affordable homes. And that target must be expressed as a minimum to be provided. So it's not a ceiling, it's not a maximum. You don't stop building when you hit the target, but you must have a floor, if you like, a minimum number below which the plan shouldn't go. And it's a target for the entire plan period, so 16 to 36, 20-year plan period. And it's normally expressed as an annual requirement. So although annual figures, annual completion numbers go up and down, you quite often see a housing target expressed as 450 a year or 500 a year, rather than it being referred to as 10,000 over the plan period. So we must have a minimum requirement in the plan, a minimum target in the plan. The whole idea in setting out a target is that each local authority consumes its own smoke and addresses the entirety of its housing need. So it's a process which looks at the evidence, how much is going to be required, and aims to address that requirement. So it's not just, oh, we'll pick a number and this is what we'll decide to do. It's based on the evidence of likely future demand. And once it's set, so once the target's set in the local plan, it also serves two other important purposes. It becomes the target which is used in the 5-year land supply calculation. So once you've got a number in your local plan, say we set it at 500, your 5-year land supply requirement would be 5 times 500, 2,500 dwellings. It's also the performance measure which is used in the housing delivery test. So that's the backward-looking test that looks at how much have you delivered. So if you set your target at 500, you would be expected to have delivered 500 in each of the 3 preceding years in order to comply with the housing delivery test. So as well as aiming to deliver sufficient homes, it becomes a performance measure to assess how your local plan is performing once you've set that target in the plan. So when we produced the draft plan, it included a target to deliver 575 dwellings per year. And those 575 dwellings per year was based on a requirement that we established using the 2014 National Household Projection as our starting point. So all housing targets have to be evidence-based, and the principal bit of evidence from which they're derived are nationally produced household and population projections. So every couple of years, the government produces a set of pretty detailed statistics which tell local authorities what they can expect to happen in their areas. So they're published on a district-wide basis in terms of population change, that population change coming from all sorts of things, growth in the population or declines in the population in some areas, migration, changes in household sizes, how long we all live for, how fertile some of us might be and how many babies we're likely to have. All those sort of things get factored into the national projections and produced at a local level. And those projections are in the NPPF as the starting point for applying a standard housing needs methodology. So essentially you get a number, a starting number, then you apply the standard housing needs methodology to drive another number, and that becomes your housing target. And the way that works is essentially, and I'm paraphrasing this, simplifying it, the household projections project forward a level of growth from the past. So they are looking backwards and assuming the same sort of trends will occur in the future. So they just project forward what has been happening. And then the standard housing needs methodology applies a formula. I know we don't all like formulas, but it applies an uplift for affordable housing, which is based on the ratio between local house prices and local earnings. And the worse that relationship is, the higher the uplift you get. So essentially you get the household forecast plus an uplift, gives you a number. And in the draft plan, that number was 575 dwellings. And that's the number we plan to deliver. So I'm now just going to quickly run, and it will be very, very quickly, through the representations. And they fall into two camps: those that support the target and think we're doing enough, and those that think we're doing too much, essentially. And you can see the arguments in relation to both of those. Those who think we're doing too much, that the target is too high, are obviously concerned about things like infrastructure delivery, how a high target will impact on the character of the district. They question whether that high number of dwellings is actually required. They're worried about the impacts of climate change. And they're also in the sort of concerns about numbers, there's concerns about individual places, about how we're distributing growth. So it may not be about the overall target, but some people will say in some places there's too many homes being proposed in individual settlements. So those are all sort of arguments against growth. And then on the other side, largely dominated by the development industry, but not exclusively, is that you're not doing enough. Your plan needs to include delivery buffers. You ought to identify reserve sites. Some of your sites may not deliver. You've got all your eggs in one basket at North Walsham, and if that doesn't happen quickly, you're going to struggle to maintain a 5-year land supply. And there's lots of capacity in some places where you're not proposing sufficient growth. So some of you in your communities will have heard about alternative sites being promoted. You know, we've got alternative sites at the moment being promoted in Hovturn, in Bardersfield, lots of debate in Cromer and North Walsham about some of the alternatives which are said to be available. And one of the arguments that you can make if you want to strengthen your specific site getting through in the plan is to make the argument that the overall number is too small, you ought to plan more. And obviously if you plan more, some of the second and third preferences then come in by default as considerations. So there's a whole range of representations. They're all appended, as I say, I'm not going to go through the details, but really in essence they boil down to two things: you're planning too much or you're not planning enough. And then there are multiple arguments to support either of those two major strands. So you'll have perhaps picked up from the agenda that we are promoting a fairly radical departure from sort of national guidance in terms of how we go about setting the target in our local plan. I need to explain that really clearly, I think. So National Planning Policy Framework, which says meet your requirement, then goes on and says the requirement must be calculated in the following way. And it requires that local authorities use the 2014 National Household Projections as the first input into the calculation. So it specifies those and says if you want to use something other than the 2014 household projections, you must demonstrate exceptional circumstances. You know, your circumstances must be very different to everywhere else. They must be exceptional to justify a different approach being taken. We're proposing to use the 2016 based National Household Projections. not because they produce a lower requirement, that would be the wrong thing to do. We're proposing to use the 2016 National Household Projections because we believe they are more accurate as a starting point. The 2014 figures in North Norfolk have been shown to include more growth in previous years than actually happened. So they are factually wrong. And even the development industry, when we present that argument to them, accept that the 2014 figures are factually incorrect. They start from an inflated starting point and then project that inflated starting point forwards into future years. The argument which is made when we try and defend this 2016 figure and say that the 2014 figure is wrong is that the development industry don't argue that the figure is wrong. They argue that the reasons why the figure is wrong don't persist anymore into the 2016 and 2018 figures. In other words, it was a one-off error and it doesn't carry forward into the later projections. And that argument has been run at a couple of public inquiries at planning appeals, and we've prevailed there. We've been able to persuade inspectors that actually the error that was in the 2014 figures does persist in the later projections, and as a consequence, the later projections produce a number which is too high. That error doesn't appear in the 2016 household projections it was corrected for, and therefore they are the better projections to start from. And what that essentially does is it reduces the annual requirement from about 550 houses a year to a significantly lower number, 460 houses a year. So about 90 houses a year less would be required if we use the 2016 figures. That has a major knock-on impact. Well, that doesn't sound a lot. 90 houses a year less over a 20-year plan period is nearly 2,000 houses less. You know, it's a lot of houses less. And it also means that in your 5-year land supply test and your housing delivery test, you're being challenged to deliver 460 a year rather than 550 a year. So for the rest of the plan period, it would be substantially easier, not straightforward, but substantially easier to hit the 5-year land supply requirement moving forwards because you're starting from that lower starting point. Now, that approach to setting the requirement is, I don't know whether it's unique because I haven't looked at every authority in the country, but it's certainly different to what most authorities do, and it is challengeable. It depends upon us at the examination being able to persuade an inspector that the logic is you don't use incorrect numbers in projecting forwards for the next 20 years. And we've already won the argument that the numbers are incorrect. So why would we do anything else? You know, why would we revert to a situation where we accept the 2014 figures, having already won the argument that they are incorrect and start from too high a position? But nevertheless, the inspector will spend probably a couple of days looking at these numbers and trying to establish whether they're right or wrong. And you need to be aware that that is a risk that we will be asked to justify that number. And the inspector's got the discretion to change it through the examination process. That target is changeable through the examination like all other aspects of the plan. So that's the requirement. So I'm recommending that you base the methodology, you start with the methodology, which is based on the 2016 figures, and we set out a minimum, and it's important that it's a minimum requirement of 460 dwellings per year. Then the second part of the recommendation, and this is almost as important, is that the plan doesn't aim to just deliver the minimum. It aims to deliver more than the minimum. And there are a number of sound reasons for doing that. The most important one is the separate target for delivering affordable homes, which we're setting at 2,000. And it's 2,000 of the total. It's not 2,000 in addition to the total. But it won't have escaped you that the logic is the more homes you build, the greater number of affordable dwellings you get, because one is a proportion of the other. Our affordable housing policies are set at a percentage of total growth. If you build 20,000 houses, you get X amount of affordable homes. If you build 40,000 houses, you get twice as many affordable homes because you've delivered twice as many dwellings overall. So there's a direct linear relationship between the number of homes built and the number of affordables delivered. And obviously affordable housing needs in North Norfolk are really high. We've separately assessed the requirement for affordable housing to be about 1,995 affordable units over the plan period, is what we're aiming to deliver. If you built less than 10,000 homes as a total, you wouldn't deliver 2,000 affordable units. It's as simple as that, that there must be, you know, sufficient overall housing to drive that affordable housing figure up to the 2,000. So that's one good reason for trying to deliver more than the minimum. A second is inspectors like to see buffers, delivery buffers. They do not believe, and they're probably right, that every aspect of a plan will deliver. They expect some failure. They expect some sites to fall away, some things not to happen. And they will typically look for a 10% delivery buffer, if you like. They give the plan a little bit more certainty that it will actually do what it says on the tin. The third is North Norfolk has got a high percentage of second homes. That proportion of second homes means that dwellings are not available for other people to live in. So the housing needs are not addressed. If everybody's got 2 houses, you need twice as many of them. So we have about a 10% second home holiday figure across the district averaged. We can expect some of the new homes to be occupied as second homes, and therefore we need more principal residences to make up the shortfall. And the fourth and last reason for aiming to deliver more, before I say how many more, is it's a risk mitigation measure. If the inspector concludes in his or her wisdom that the 460 number, the lower number, is not enough, they can raise the target up to a higher number without us having to produce another plan, because the plan has already got proposals in it to deliver more growth than the minimum. So it creates a good deal of flexibility in the plan for the inspector to say, well, I'm not actually satisfied with 460. I'd like you to aim to deliver 500 and something. And we've got 500 and something in the plan anyway. So we're not back to square one having to produce another plan because our plan is unsound. So the last remaining question is, how much more should we aim to deliver? Should we aim to deliver 460 plus 10%, 460 plus 100, you know, how much more? And the recommendation uses some very precise wording to allow a degree of flexibility here. The recommendation says that we aim to deliver up to 560. And that up to creates all that flexibility between 460 and 550 for us to determine quite where we pitch the delivery strategy when we've completed all the work on sites, because you'll know there's obviously a few sites outstanding at the moment. So I don't want to be wedded to a precise number. And I also like the terminology up to, because if you express another number, say we aim to deliver 550, aim to deliver becomes a de facto target. It replaces the 460 and becomes another target, and people will argue that the plan includes a target for 550. So the words up to are really important in the recommendation that I put in front of you. So recommendations twofold. We use the 2016 household forecast as the starting point for calculating the requirement. That produces a minimum plan target of 460. And then secondly, we produce a plan that aims to deliver more than the minimum and up to 560. Sharp-eyed amongst you will see there's 2 recommendations in your reports. There's the one at the top of the report that's got a figure of 560. And there's one at the bottom of the report that's got a figure of 550. I'm recommending the 560 because it's good to round up, not round down. So the formal recommendation is the plan aims to deliver up to 560 dwellings a year. And I'm going to stop and take any questions.
Thank you, Mark, for that summary of the report. Just looking at the floor, I see that we've got a hand raised from Councillor Toy. Pass to you.
Yep, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mark, the 2,000 affordable homes, we've spoken about the 2014 and 2016 overall numbers. Are we comfortable that the 2,000 affordable homes is the right number as well, with the figures that that's based on?
Right.
Because, yeah, sorry, I was just going to say that I think it's right that we produce the right amount and not too many, as well as not too little. Because too many has a knock-on effect in many areas as well. So, thank you.
Okay, so the affordable housing requirement isn't just a function of mathematics where you say 30% of X delivers Y. It's not a mathematical sort of calculation to arrive at 2,000. The 2,000, or 1,995 is the actual number, comes from the Strategic Housing Market Assessment, which looked at affordable housing need in North Norfolk. It looked at available stock. It looked at the projections moving forward and tackles existing need and newly arising need over the planned period. So it's not just about what exists out there today, it's what might arise in terms of affordable housing need in the next 15 years or so. Now, it won't perhaps have escaped some of you. You may have noticed that 1,995 is a figure which is less than the number of people who are currently on the housing waiting list. You know, those of you that follow the waiting list or are familiar with them will know there's often 3,000 people on the housing waiting lists. You know, why are we setting an affordable housing target of 1,995? Now, the answer to that is there's no requirement in planning policy to address all of the housing need. And I know that sounds odd. What you're required to do is address all of the need in the highest need groups. About a third of the people who are on our housing waiting list, I haven't looked at the numbers recently, are actually on the options, on the transfer list. There's a lot of people who are already in affordable housing, but that affordable housing is unsuitable and they want to move to different affordable housing, but they're nevertheless already in affordable housing stock, and they move out of one affordable unit, releasing it to somebody else into another. So the waiting lists are actually quite a crude measure of affordable housing need. They're not the be all and end all. What the SHMA does, is the Strategic Housing Market Assessment, is it looks at the housing waiting list, but it also looks at earnings, it looks at the available housing stock, it looks at the market sector, house prices. You know, some people who are in housing need today on the register will actually meet their need next year through a change of employment and improved circumstances. So it looks at all of those sort of different considerations to arrive at this 1,195 figure. Now, the other thing to bear in mind, which is an important consideration, is our affordable housing policies. The sources of affordable housing are mainly twofold: the rural exceptions policy, delivering on sites outside of development boundaries, and the allocated sites through Section 106 legal agreements where developers are providing affordable units on housing estates. And the proportions of delivery from those two sources fluctuate up and down depending on how many big estates are being built at a particular point in time. But the key thing to bear in mind is the rural exceptions policy is unlimited in terms of its policy capacity. There's no limit on the number of affordable houses that can be built through the rural exceptions policy. We obviously aspire to try and deliver a scheme in every village in North Norfolk if we can. So the planning policy is extremely flexible, very flexible. The difficulty around the rural exceptions policy is not planning policy really, it's site availability, it's funding, it's community resistance to schemes being delivered in certain locations. It's not a planning policy restriction in terms of how many affordable homes can be built on rural exceptions. So that's a long answer to your question, John, but essentially the plan, what it aims to do is deliver the 1,990 affordables, and that is the number which is required in order to address all those in high levels of need today and moving forwards over the plan period.
Oh, that's great. Thank you, Mark. I just, as I said at the beginning with my question, it's that we hit the right level, because if to get, we suddenly want more affordable housing means we need to build more estates. There's a whole environmental and knock-on effect of building all those houses. So I'm keen to ensure that we, and I'm sure you have, but to make sure that we've researched and got the best numbers that we can to suit our district. So thank you for that answer.
I think it'd be very easy, John, to say, in order to deliver another 1,000 affordable homes, we want to deliver 1,000 more affordable homes. We're not satisfied with the 1,995. Let's aim to deliver another 1,000 affordable homes. You'd have to build another 5,000 houses to deliver 1,000 affordable homes. It's about a 1 in 5 ratio. We get about 20% affordable housing across the board, for all different sorts of sources. And I don't think anybody would really make a strong argument for increasing the housing target overall by another 5,000 houses to deliver 1,000 affordables, when the evidence suggests those 5,000 houses are not actually required. It sounds like a route to market failure to me, planning to do too much for one particular very good reason would have other consequences elsewhere in terms of environmental impacts, infrastructure impacts, and so on. So there is a balance in there, there is a judgment. How much overall housing is necessary and what's a reasonable yield of affordables, which gives us a good chance of addressing identified needs. And that's the balance we've tried to strike in the plan.
Thank you.
Thank you, John. Can I move over to Councillor Wendy Fredericks? Would you like to ask a question?
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, members. Good morning, officers. Mark, I'm just really interested, because you're really knowledgeable about this. How do you think that we can address the affordable housing issue without having to rely on market housing? Have you got any thoughts on that? I know it's a $1 million question, but I'm really interested, because obviously you're the guy that knows these things. I'm just wondering if you've ever thought about a different sort of approach.
So there's I think there's a housing strategy workshop meeting coming up in the next week or 10 days. I don't know how many that are on screen now have been invited to that, but the challenge that's been put down for that workshop is, how do we deliver more affordable homes? And there are lots of different models, different approaches that can be used. Some local authorities are investing significant amounts of money in directly building their own affordable housing stock. They're affordable housing providers in their own right. The rural exceptions policy, as I say, the planning policy is pretty permissive. So it's about how do you incentivise landowners to actually release land for development, the things that can be done in there. There may be lots of different models, but I don't think it's right for the working party to be discussing it, to be honest, Wendy. It's not really to do with this particular policy. It's a much bigger issue. I think the key message I'm trying to get across is what the working party needs to focus on is, are our planning policies restricting in an unacceptable way the delivery of affordable homes? Now, what I'm saying is the rural exceptions policy is about as flexible as you could possibly make it so that those restrictions don't apply. And in terms of the bigger development proposals, we're pushing the viability proportions, the percentage of affordables delivered through cross-subsidy, as high as we can possibly get them without rendering development unviable. And we're also lowering the site sizes so that you get an affordable housing yield off of smaller development sites. Because at the moment, you're only getting affordable housing on the larger development proposals. Our policies are looking to secure affordable contributions from smaller development sites. And those three mechanisms combined should put us in a reasonable position. The other stuff about, you know, the authority's appetite to invest directly in housing and other sort of delivery vehicles largely sit outside of the local plan and really a matter for the housing strategy, which obviously needs to knit with what planning policy is doing. You know, the local plan's part of the housing strategy and vice versa. So I think that, you know, what else can we do around delivery is a debate that is going to go on post local plan and through the plan period, to be honest with you. Probably didn't answer your question there, Wendy, but deliberately.
No, that's fine. Thank you. No,
It's a big
that's
debate.
brilliant. Thank you. Yeah.
Anybody else would like to come in at this point? Councillor Pearce.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Mark, I know you and I have had 2 or 3 discussions and with others as well. I've longed to understand better for the public what is affordable housing. I mean, in the sense of, you know, a lot of people may have inspired to buy a house, start and work up the ladder. But what about the social rent? The people that live in rented accommodations? We have long argued and explained fully that our wages are lower up here, our job level is less up here, and that alone, and pushing the fact of second homes, decries the fact that people cannot get onto the housing ladder. Now, just because we say affordable housing, what proportion of that in the plan is going to go for those that can afford to buy through various schemes and products, and those that can't? I mean, and they do end up living in rented accommodation. I mean, has there been enough consideration at this stage to look at that split and to look at that ratio? Because, you know, are we frightened to say rented? Because there's a lot of people, or more population than we think, that's actually living in rented accommodation, whether it's private rent or whether it's done by a housing association and or whatever means. It's just a question I'd like some explaining, please. Thank you.
Okay, so I think the first thing to bear in mind is the term affordable housing's become a bit of a catch-all term, really. You know, years back we used to refer to council housing, then we used to refer to social housing, and now we refer to affordable housing. And affordable housing captures multiple tenures, so it captures your council housing, your social housing, discounted market housing, low cost, shared ownership, shared equity, all those products that we sometimes talk about, in theory, can be affordable homes and fit in with the definition of affordable housing. The key thing is it's housing which is made available to people who can't afford to meet their own needs in the market, whether they're buying or renting. So there's an income test, if you like, attached to the product. And the other important test which is attached to the product is its price, whether it's a purchase price or a rental price, is protected in perpetuity through legal agreement. So once it's affordable, it remains affordable, or the product is recycled sometimes. And the third aspect of it is all affordable housing will be subject to some sort of access controls in terms of occupancy, who can occupy, to prevent millionaires and rich people taking advantage of cheaper housing products and making lots of money for it. You can only occupy affordable housing if you're in need. So those are the 3 things which define it. Increasingly, the affordable products have crept into shared ownership, shared equity, discounted market products. I would say they've all got a place to play. There are people that need those type of products, but increasingly they become less and less genuinely affordable. You know, the price to the individual in a shared ownership property or a shared equity property is a higher price than social rent. Social rent is actually traditional council housing would have been the lowest cost. Social rent is a low cost. So what we're trying to do, and again, this is for the housing strategy, not for planning policy to determine. Housing strategy will be looking at the mix of affordable house types which are delivered on these individual proposals. What proportion come forward as social rent, genuine social rent linked to local incomes, and what proportion might be some other type of affordable product. the government has specified, and there are reasons for this, that a minimum of, I think it's 25%, forgive me, I've got that figure wrong, but 25% of all affordable housing must be provided as a low cost to purchase product, a starter home type of product. It's not an intervention I really favour, because I'd rather see social housing on these sites, but the government wants to see the affordable housing mixes include a set proportion of dwellings that people can buy, albeit at a cheaper price. But we want social rent alongside it, Nigel, as part of the mix, but that mix needs looking at through individual planning applications, when the housing enabling team could look at who's on the register and they can try and match what's being provided on an individual site with those people who are on the list at the time and need accommodation.
If I could
yes,
just
that-
come, if I could just
sorry.
come a bit. Sorry, Mr. Chairman, if I could just come back, Mark, that's fine. I understand what you're saying. It is a catch-all phrase. And my reason for asking that question is, in fact, I don't like this catch-all phrase. And you've just explained the situation and the parameters, to capture all these markets. But at the end of the day, I understand housing strategic plans and offices and various courses that was going to be happen and approaches. But I don't think we pay enough attention, that's everybody in the authority, to social rent, because of, there are people that are never going to be able to get onto the property ladder, no matter which option you might try to market, rework or offer to these people. And with my term as a councillor, I have seen the situation exactly as you've described it. You've done it well. Second homes, people buy to sell, buy to rent, etc. We've got to find, I think, some stronger way of enabling people that are local born, local work, local employ, local live, that can never afford a property of their own. We've got to look after them. And I would just like to see immediately on our plans some form of greater diversification, where the social rented, you call it council houses, we've got to find something, is actually a quantifiable term within the affordable market on all plans. That's all. Thank you very much so far.
I think on that particular aspect of Mark's presentation, it's I think the ability to provide social housing on any authority depends to a certain extent on how much land an authority actually holds itself to be able to develop social housing. As you know, our land bank, as it were, was transferred out circa 2008 or whenever to the social housing providers. And that may be where the scheme begins to break down slightly, because, as we know, they cover an area outside this district, and they can offload properties which they no longer want to maintain and repair. By and large, they do invest in the district, but there's no restriction on the housing providers investing outside the district in other parts of the county. And I'll give way to Mark on this point, because he might want to correct me on something, or just explain a little bit more about it.
No, I don't want to correct you, Chair. I think everything, I can nod my head with lots of what you're saying. What I'm going to say, though, is I'd like to focus on the housing policy and the numbers, the purpose of the report, because I think this debate's important, but it's a debate for the housing strategy more broadly. The policies about stock disposal, whether we're delivering social rent or affordable rent or shared ownership, they're all important, but they're not really related to the overall housing target, which is covered in the report. We haven't got housing enabling team aren't in the meeting. I'm sure they'd have useful things to offer if they were, but it's a much broader discussion. So I'd like to try and focus on the housing target. As I say, there is a workshop organised, housing strategy workshop organised coming up in the next few weeks. I'm sure we'll cover some of this ground.
I see two hands raised. Councillor Virginia Gay, who's been waiting extremely patiently, and then Councillor Toy.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd just like to say a couple of things. I can tell that a great deal of thought has gone into these amendments that we have here. We always knew that this was an iterative process. I think that as the working party, there's very clear evidence that we have, over several years, considered various options. In particular, we very carefully considered the 2014 projections. But I think, as this report makes clear, we've always come to the conclusion that the 2016 projections are indeed more robust. And there are other things which we've observed over the years. Our population profile is different. Our growth doesn't come from population growth. It comes from inward migration. And my own view is that history would suggest that the 460 million is a realistic and viable figure for us. So I'm inclined to support this, Chairman, if you are. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gay, for those remarks. And if I can move to Councillor Toy, would you like to?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman, for letting me go again. Second chance at this one, but I just wanted to try and bring a simple explanation to planning policy and affordable homes, and hopefully Mark will nod as right or correct me if wrong. We, as a planning policy, will allot a percentage of homes to the affordable area. That affordable area covers whether that's rented, part ownership, and all the other schemes that Mark talked about. That is dealt with by the housing policy people, who will look at each area, decide what's needed in each area, and work with the developer to ensure that we deliver the right amount. The object of this exercise today is to say that we have a policy that produces 20% in that area. We then work with the housing team at a later date when we're going through development. Hopefully that simplifies it so that we grasp what we're doing here today. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Toy. I think that we can support this methodology. It seems to me to be almost unnatural to follow the 2014 population figures when we know that the 2016 and 2018 challenge the assumptions in the 2014 figures. It seems to be the government's policy to stick with the 2014 because it bakes in additional numbers, and we know that the government are anxious to build, as they announced when they introduced the recent white paper. I'm satisfied that this is a mechanism that supports our corporate plan for delivering local affordable housing for local need. It is a balancing act, of course, because we need market rate properties to cross-finance affordable housing. And we do not want to build more than is necessary because we don't want a stagnant housing market. It would be, in an ideal world, it would be a better outcome if we knew that the inspectors who look at our final local plans and examine them, that they do take into account, regional factors such as a higher number of second homes in our district, the fact that, it's inward migration that grows the population rather than natural indigenous growth, and factors like that. But I am sure that the policy planning team will make that clear to the examining inspector, and I suggest that we endorse the recommendations in the report, and unless anybody has any final comments to make, I think we should move to a vote. Anyone? No. So the recommendations, just to summarise them, are to follow the 2016 census figures, and to set a minimum of 460, a maximum of 560 units per annum, and to recommend policy HOU1 to Cabinet for approval. So can I move to the floor for a proposer, please, for these recommendations? Councillor Heinrich, and a seconder, Councillor Toy. Do we need to move to a recorded vote on this, Emma?
Yes, I think so, Chairman, as it's a recommendation to Cabinet. So I'll just call out your names alphabetically, and if you could each indicate if you're voting for, against, or abstaining. So starting with Councillor Brown.
For.
Councillor Fisher.
For.
Councillor Fredericks.
For.
Councillor Gay.
For.
Councillor Grove-Jones.
For.
Councillor Heinrich.
For.
Councillor Mancini-Boyle.
For.
Councillor Pearce.
For.
Councillor Punchard.
For.
Councillor Toy.
As for.
Councillor Stockton.
For.
And Councillor Varley.
For.
And that is unanimous, Chairman.
Thank you, Emma, for that. Right, just moving to the next item on the agenda, item 8. This is the local plan draft policy approaches to housing standards in 4 areas as listed in the recommendations: accessible adaptable properties, minimum space standards, water efficiency, sustainable construction, energy efficiency, and carbon reduction. Can I move to Officer Ian Withington? Thank you, Ian.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, the paper covers 4 policies, which the Chair has just introduced. We obviously consulted on them as part of the housing section regulation 18, and they form an integral part to the response of creating sustainable places and addressing climate change on the local plan. The intention is that the policies will form part of a wider updated section covering climate change and sustainable development in the final plan, and I'll brief members on that and ask their opinions under item 10 on the agenda. But this report starts on page 71 if you've got a hard copy, or 75 on my PDF copy. As well as reviewing and responding to the Regulation 18 responses in the report, I've attached, as you hopefully got used to by now, in Appendix 1, the amended policies, the summaries of the feedback, and in Appendix 2, the amended or updated policies, which start on page 113 or 117 PDF. You will notice that I've gone into some detail in the reports on the background, justification, and in places for legislation. I've done this for good reason, not least because the Working Party membership has changed since the policies were last discussed, And a recap on the evidence which supported the approach at Reg 18, I feel is necessary, but it is also changing. And it's important that you understand that these changes or what changes have taken place. I'm actually going to start with policy HOU 11, which is the energy efficiency in construction standards. So that's in section 8 of the report, which starts on page 82 or 86. And you'll see that the approach not only seeks to respond to the Council's declaration of climate change or climate emergency by bringing forward a more challenging target for the reduction in carbon emissions, but it does this ahead of building regulations. I would just like to point out that in doing so, members need to be clear in your own minds the two separate roles of a local planning authority and that of any corporate ambition the council may have in relation to its own developments. As outlined in paragraph 8.13, I think it is, the standards set in such a policy would apply to all development as a minimum and is informed by the evidence. It doesn't inhibit any developer, including development brought forward by the council, to go further in line with his own ambitions or any environmental charter, as long as it's prepared to invest and is in conformity with the local plan as a whole. The approach that's put forward is underpinned by evidence, and with any policy should be informed by the evidence and not just opinions. That said, I'll go into sort of a little bit of a history of it. Previously at Reg 18 stage, we had a policy ambition for a 19% reduction in carbon emissions. This was in line with the government's restrictions in Planning and Energy Act 2008, and in line with clarifications brought in by a written ministerial statement in 2015, which at the time put in place a ceiling around the setting of a local standard with regards to this matter. It was set, or the policy was set at that level so as not to introduce legal and soundness issues into the local plan. Since then, the government has consulted on what they call a future home standard and responded to this consultation as recently as mid-January. So effectively 3 to 4 weeks ago, they published this information. So they have confirmed the intention to update building regulations to require net carbon zero ready homes by 2025. The government's, in that response, they've also clarified local councils have a role in helping to meet net zero target and tackle climate change, and that the government will not bring the previous amendments to the Planning and Energy Act, which restricted our ability to set a localized target past 19% reduction. And this effectively means that we, local authorities, currently retain powers to set local energy efficiency standards for new homes beyond building regulations. I won't go into that anymore, but there is more information on paragraphs 8.1 to 8.15 in the report. And there is certainly an awful lot more detail on this in background paper number 7, which accompanied the Regulation 18 consultation. But the long and the short of it is that through the Future Home Standard, the government intends to introduce requirements for energy efficiency through fabric first design and technology that have to result in significant reductions in carbon emissions by 2025 in order for the dwellings to be zero carbon. They have specifically stated that this will be done incrementally in order to achieve a step change in design, skills and investment that is required in the industry to achieve that. And in response to their consultation, they've indicated they intend to introduce an interim update to building regs, which will result in a 31% reduction in CO2 from new dwellings when compared to the current standards. And they've also indicated that this could be sometime this year, and that they will then, once that's been introduced, consult on measures necessary, costings and further timings in order to introduce future changes to move to a phased level of in 2023 to 2025. Now, one of the arguments I've put in that paper, some people may say that this negates the requirement for such a policy in the local plan. It could be superseded by the time the plan gets to examination, or it could be superseded shortly afterwards. And the government is clearly saying the route for all this is outside planning policy and through building regulations. That is something to be aware of. Nevertheless, the approach accords with the council ambition, and it's reasonable to amend the policy with the increased targets for the Regulation 19 consultation. I think there is a strong direction of travel, given the previous commitments by government where they've reneged in this area. Some of us could remain sceptical. However, I would retort to that to say the government's ambition is clearly published. Their clean growth strategy, the road to zero, their legally binding commitment made in 2019 to bring all greenhouse gas emissions to net zero by 2050, as detailed in the report, section 4, 4.11, 4.13, and their very recent consultation response outlining the future home standard is all very clear that they will be moving towards this. And on top of that, it was only, what's the date, 22nd, on the 10th of February, the council received a letter from the ministry advising the previous building regulation changes that require nearly zero energy under building regs are going to be brought into effect by April. And some of them have actually been brought into effect in December, depending on whether it's public or private sector. Unfortunately, they don't define exactly what energy efficient performance is, but they've clearly indicated that these standards should now be looked at through building regulations. Effectively increasing the target reduction ambition for the policy from 19% reduction to 31%, but ahead of the anticipated changes, I think is appropriate given our local circumstances. It sends a clear message and aids in the transition in line with the direction of travel. A signal that developers in North Northern need to invest in supply chains. They need to upskill their workforce and update their designs and incorporate mitigation and adaptation measures and technology to support the delivery of lowest levels of carbon emissions needed to deliver homes after the plan's 2022 adoption. So in reality, it's anticipated that rather than design measures, low-cost heating, passive measures in the short term, developers would probably place greater reliance on technology such as solar panels, but in the longer term, they're going to have to start to look at their designs and the fabric first approach. You will see from some of the responses at Reg 18 that there was a call for greater prescription in the policy. The option of how they do so should be prescribed, and the policy requirement is that applications should be accompanied by a compliance statement covering energy efficiency and carbon reduction, which specifically shows how the policy will be achieved. I don't think it's for us to prescribe how it should be done. It's for developers to tell us how they intend to do it through a mixture of measures, but they do need to tell us how they're going to do it. And the policy is sort of clarified in that respect to make sure that we have as officers the information in front of us to know how they're going to determine it. The policy is also amended to evoke BREEAM very good standards rather than good, but a threshold is introduced, so it's not so burdensome on small business. And BREEAM is a standardization. It's a design code measure that applies to non-residential development. So it's bringing into the full commercial sector, but a small threshold is used, so it's to say not to burden our smaller employees. I would just say I've discussed this approach with Councillor Lloyd in forming it, and I've also discussed it with Councillor Toy in the role of portfolio holder last week, where it was mentioned that members would like to see an element of progression in this policy. I would say, although the technical reports and costings are yet to be undertaken by the government as part of the Future Home Standard, so in taking the standard past 31% to almost much higher reductions, those technical reports and costings are yet to be consulted on. So it'll be very hard to put into the policy an actual target requirement, if you like. However, I do think that the wording can be added to the policy that reflects the ambition of progression. And we can put in a wording to the policy that sets a minimum target. I propose to add additional wording that developers should seek to maximize reductions, and proposals to go beyond and seek to achieve net zero ready will be encouraged or looked on favourably. We'll have to think carefully along the wording for that, but I certainly don't wish to be prescriptive. The other three policies, sorry, water policy, which is HOU 10. I'm not going to say much about that. It's well evidenced that the whole region is an area of water stress. We've agreed through the Norfolk Strategic Framework to introduce a standardised policy on this. It's supported by Anglian Water and the Environment Agency, so we will invoke the optional standards we have through national policy to require restrictions on water usage to 110 litres. The policy is amended ever so slightly just for reasons of clarity and to ensure that we get the documentation that we're required. Minimum space standards, HOU 9. Again, the approach brings into force optional standards through building regulations as minimums. We can only evoke this standard through a local plan review. So we currently don't have it now. The report details a lot of the evidence for this, which is essentially the population profile, the nature of the existing housing stock, and the low levels of new development that currently meet these standards in full, specifically in relation to 1, 2 and 3 bedroom properties where we have the greatest need and our policy seeks to deliver. There's clear justification to require all new properties to at least meet or exceed the prescribed minimum space standards. And again, there is much, much more detail in background paper number 7, which details the entire evidence base that support this approach. I've amended the policy ever so slightly to introduce clarity, aid interpretation. Now, the adaptable properties, which is HOU 8, this supports and is seen as in conjunction with minimum space standards. Again, I've set out much of the justification in the report and highlighted the previous background paper for further information if you want to read a bit more detail on the housing stock and why this is required. And I've introduced changes in Appendix 2, making the policy slightly more up-to-date and relevant at this stage of the plan. And it clearly shows the exceptions to the approach taken where viability is considered to be an issue. That was one of the feedback from some of the developers. The text points out, or the text of the policy is updated to point out that wheelchair accessibility standards, which technically should only be applied, they should only apply to affordable properties. However, we've taken the view that we don't see why they should be applied to affordable properties. They should be applied to all properties. So there's flexibility in the approach, allowing developers to apply them in market and affordable properties, although the actual justification is based on the affordable properties, which is in line with the legal requirements. I could bring up the actual policy and appendices if members wish me to do that. Otherwise, I will just open up for discussion with yourselves.
Sorry, thank you. I was on mute there. Thank you, Ian, for walking us through that. I've got 2 hands raised. I've got Councillor Lloyd and then Councillor Toy. If I can hand over to Councillor Lloyd. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Very briefly, I'd just like to thank the officers for including these enhanced requirements on carbon saving. The wording, as I see it, leaves us open to any increases in carbon reduction that are applied from central government, but a 31% starting point is a good one compared to the existing 19, and it keeps us within existing policies and reduces the opportunity for challenge by developers too. So yeah, I welcome this. Really, my comments are focused on the climate change aspects, particularly of what's been written in this section. But I'm very supportive of them, and I hope members will be too. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lloyd. I'm sure we're all encouraged by your comments on this subject, as you are the portfolio holder with, as it were, the most knowledge on carbon capture measures and carbon reduction measures. So pleased to hear that that you're supporting the policies as drafted. Councillor Toy and then Councillor Virginia Gay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ian, thank you for a really good report. It's well thought out and constructed. I particularly like the strengthening of some of the words where we've gone from should to will. We've made it much stronger. So delighted about that. The 31%, as you've alluded to, I still think that although government has made it clear their intention, that I think we should have some sort of wording that enables us to incrementally increase if that does not deliver from central government. So I would obviously appreciate other people's views on that, but that's my position on that. I think it should have just a few words in there that allows us to adopt that position should it not come from central government. But hopefully it will, and that will override this policy and make the whole thing stronger. So beyond that, obviously delighted that obviously Councillor Lloyd has had input, because it's important, for all of these things, the water, as well as this that we're talking about on HO U11. And thank you again for a good piece of work.
Do you want to come back, Ian, on the point of the incremental amendments that Councillor Toy was referring to at all?
I said I'm happy to put some wording in about progression in the policy. I haven't put it in there, but we'll have to think carefully about it. But if that's what members wish us to do, then I shall endeavour to do that. I think it is wise, but I wouldn't want it to commit simply because of those technical advancements, the costing element. It just has to reflect the progression and the expectation that these will be a minimum and it will keep on going to net zero. So we'll have to think carefully on the wordings.
Thank you for that. Councillor Virginia Gay, I can invite you in.
Thank you, Chairman. I'd just like to say, I also think that we need this policy, whatever the government does. So I think we should have it. I think it shows our intentions, and I think it also shows that we've responded to the Regulation 18 consultation, because people often take the view that there's no point responding because, council has made up its mind. And I think at every stage we've demonstrated the council has not made up its mind. It has responded to the submissions that we have received, and I must thank officers for the work they've done in order to do that. I very much support the requirement for a compliance statement, and I also support the suggestion we should have wording for progression. Ian has indicated that it will be in the policy, but I would like to be sure that the wording will be in the policy and not in background text. That's it, and I definitely support these 4 policies, Chairman. I'd like to propose them. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Gay. Any further comments or questions on these policies before us on this particular item? No. Well, I'm delighted, Ian, to see that we've got minimum space standards in the plan moving forward. We know that developers like to challenge these because it makes developments more viable if they squeeze more units into reduced areas. I know that there is an ongoing problem with permitted development rights on the change of use of commercial buildings to residential, and the challenges that they pose on minimum space requirements, which do not seem to feed into the equation in schemes like that. So it is an important aspect. I'm happy that comments from the public have been taken into account quite clearly in the drafting of the wording, as Councillor Virginia Gay has pointed out. So subject to just having a look at the possibility of tweaking the wording on carbon reduction that we've referred to, but without making any commitment. I'd like to move to the vote. I have Councillor Gay proposing this report. Do I have a seconder? Councillor Grove Jones has kindly seconded. So if we can move to you, Emma, to call out the roll call, please.
Thank you, Chairman. As previously, I'll call out your names alphabetically in order. So starting with Councillor Brown.
4.
Councillor Fisher.
4.
Councillor Fredericks.
4.
Councillor Gay.
4.
Councillor Grove Jones.
4.
Councillor Heinrich.
4.
Councillor Mancini Boyle.
4.
Councillor Pearce.
4.
Councillor Punchard.
4.
Councillor Toy.
4.
Councillor Stockton.
4.
And Councillor Varley.
4.
And that's unanimous, Chairman.
Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you, Emma. So we move to item 9 on your agenda, which deals with approaches to sustainable development. So these are policies SD 13 through to SD 17, as listed on the agenda. And I'm not sure whether I'm passing over to Caroline or Ian on this one.
Hopefully me, I think.
Oh, thank you, Caroline.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Yes, as the Chair's pointed out, there's 5 emerging policies that the report covers. I'll just briefly say what they are. It's pollution and hazard prevention and minimisation, transport impact of new development, parking provision, electric vehicle charging, and safeguarding land for sustainable transport. And the report is set out in the same way that Ian's is. Appendix 1 has all the Regulation 18 consultation feedback in for each of the policies, and that's summarised in section 3 of the report. And Appendix 2 sets out the proposed changes to the policies which are before you. I'm not really intending to talk through 4 of the policies as they're reasonably straightforward. They're updated versions of policies rolled forward from the core strategy. But obviously I'm happy to answer any questions on them. But I would like to briefly highlight SD16 relating to the electric vehicle charging, as this policy links to a number of policies that Ian's presented, in that it's a more proactive and forward-thinking approach by the council in order to mitigate and adapt to climate change. To put the policy into context briefly, the government's 2018 Road to Zero strategy sets out the ambition for at least 50% and as many as 70% of new car sales to be ultra low emission vehicles by 2030, alongside up to 40% of new vans. This steers a significant shift away from diesel and petrol vehicles towards electric powered vehicles. And as part of this strategy, the government considers that all new homes, where appropriate, should have electric vehicle ready charge points available. Also, recent consultations indicate that the next iteration of building regs will also have the requirement for provision of off-street electric vehicle charging points as well, in addition to similar expectations for commercial and public parking. As such, new development proposals that include the provision of parking will need to support and actively enable this transition. And consequently, policy SD13 has been designed to promote and ensure that new development that has parking included within it will deliver this electric vehicle charging infrastructure. As such, referring to the revised draft policy wording, which I think is on page 189 of the reports pack, it's been amended to basically mean the provision is a requirement. So again, it's not a should, it's a will. For all new development that incorporates parking. Also, we had some feedback basically regarding communal residential parking, and so that's been altered so that 50% of spaces would be required to have active charge points, with the remainder being passive. And at the bottom of the policy, it explains what the active and passive means. Given the rapid changes in technology and the potential variations in the provision, it's probably likely that we will provide supplementary planning guidance for this going forward. But I will finish there, and as I say, I'm happy to answer any questions on any of the draft policies that members might have. Thank you.
Thank you, Caroline, for going through that for us. Do I have any questions or comments? Councillor John Toy.
You're going to get fed up with me today, Mr. Chairman, and the rest of the group. But just can I just clarify something with you, if I may, Caroline? And thank you for the report. It's good and clear and detailed, and I do like the emphasis on the stronger words. The electric vehicle charging point, the last one you were talking about, it says that the first paragraph I was looking at, proposals that incorporate vehicle parking will include appropriate provision for electric charging points. I know I don't want to get into technicalities, but a plug socket on the outside wall is an electric vehicle charging point, but it takes a long while to charge the vehicle. So is there some sort of, it's perhaps in other guidance and not in our policies that sets that it should be 3 kilowatts or anything like that? Because that's kind of, to me, a bit open, because a socket, as I say, would provide that. Thank you.
Yeah, I think I think the actual preamble, I think it does talk about the actual kilowatts, and I think it is something, as I say, that we will need to provide supplementary planning guidance on, because it is such a sort of fast-moving area of technology. So it is something I think we will have to provide information on. I don't think it really needs, and I think it would be difficult to put it in the actual policy wording itself, but certainly in terms of the preamble, the sort of policy justification, we could certainly, I think there is talk about that, but you're right, it's something, again, it's such a fast moving thing, we need to kind of, I think, have additional advice available, an advice note, so hopefully that will be picked up.
Yeah, thank you, Caroline. It's becoming more sort of apparent that our policies need to work hand in glove with building regulation improvements or more modern measures being brought in through building regulation approvals. Can I go to you, Mark, and then I'll come back to you, Councillor Lloyd?
Yeah, I was just going to make a more general point that we'll sort of audit all the policies towards the end of the process, and I'm anxious to look at words like appropriate. This is one of the lessons that Virginia's taught me over the years about the precision in language, and where we've got a policy that talks about an appropriate standard but doesn't actually tell you what that appropriate standard is. I think we'll replace it with words like to an approved specification. So that will give us the opportunity to approve and modify a different specification as technology improves through either supplementary planning guidance or general guidance to applicants. But the broader point that I think John's making is an important one, that where we use words like appropriate, we need to be a little bit cautious to define what we actually mean and avoid sort of loopholes around, as you say, somebody sticking a shaver point on the back door and saying I can charge my car there, but it'll take me 15 years to do it.
Councillor Lloyd, sorry, you've been waiting patiently.
No, that's fine. Thank you, Chair. Yeah, Councillor Toy makes a very good point, actually. It's good to button that down. I guess we all know what developers are capable of. Of course, I support this. Electric vehicles seem to be emerging as the leader to replace fossil fuel driven transport. So I don't think we've got any choice but to support this at the moment as it stands. I would say that there's a bit of at the bottom. On what page am I on here? Hold on. Sorry, my paper says page 189. It's about the provision of electricity substations. Now, we all know that Norfolk's a very rural area, and a lot of it is fed by overhead power lines on telegraph poles. We've all seen them. I don't know what officers would think of this, but it seems to me that this is a get-out clause for developers to say, well, there isn't the power associated with this development, so you can't force us to do it. I think I'd like to see that strengthened some way, so that that there is some emphasis on the developer to work with power suppliers to make sure that there is the required energy required to drive the number of EVCPs. That's all. Otherwise, I completely support it. I think it's the way forward. And actually, I don't think we'll have any choice. I think the events, the way Land Rover has announced this week, or last week, I should say, about going fully electric to 2025. I think Ford will do the same soon, and they'll all topple over in the same direction. So yeah, it needs joining up with national infrastructure. This, because if this is happening, EV cars across the whole country, we'll be in trouble if they all switch on at the same time. But so that's another issue, and not for today. But yeah, I'm fully supportive of this once again. Thank you, Chair.
Yes, thank you, Nigel. Yes, yeah, we need to be energy secure, don't we, in terms of having the sufficient power to step up to the measures that are being proposed as we progress with our building under measures like our the ones set out in these reports. If nobody has any further comments or need to speak on this, I propose, Emma, that we move to a vote. Do I have a proposer for this particular agenda item? Councillor Toy, thank you very much. And a seconder? Councillor Gerard Mancini Boyle, thank you very much. So if I can move over to Emma to conduct the vote, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, once again, I'll call your names out alphabetically. If you could just indicate for, against or abstain. So starting with Councillor Brown.
For.
Councillor Fisher.
For.
Councillor Fredericks.
For.
Councillor Gay.
4.
Councillor Grove Jones,
4.
Councillor Heinrich,
4.
Councillor Mancini Boyle,
4,
Councillor Pearce,
4.
Councillor Punchard,
4.
Councillor Toy,
4,
Councillor Stockton,
4.
and Councillor Varley.
4.
And once again, that is unanimous, Chairman.
thank you, Emma. And so we move to the next item on the agenda, item 10, local plan update remaining policies and approach to climate change. And I presume this is for you, Mark?
I think Ian's going to talk to you, actually, Chair.
Right, thank you. Sorry,
Ian's
sorry.
going to lead. Yeah.
Sorry, Ian, over to you.
That's all right. If I can start off, and I'm sure Mark will come in as well. What I just wanted to say, I've got 2 items. One's to give you a very brief update on where we are on the policies, and the other is just to seek the members' opinion on the way forward in a matter of structure of a document and climate change. But by way of update, I think it's safe to say that we've now spent almost a year covering the policies from Regulation 18 moving forward to Regulation 19. We are pretty much there in all of the policies. There are still some remaining, such as telecoms and some conversions, or how we approach conversions in the countryside. Flood risk is another one off the top of my head. So there will be, we've still got to review those. They will come back probably in dribs and drabs. We will also discuss those with the portfolio holder and working party chair to see which ones come back to working party. But on the whole, work is now moving towards bringing all these policies together into one document. And as Mark says, that will then give us the opportunity to start going through them, looking at the specific wording and pull out the continuity of them. So really, between now and that work, you'll be seeing less of me and less of Caroline until we've done that work. There is work remaining on the sites and North Walsham, so I suspect those items will be coming to the fore and coming back to the next stage as a working party. Behind the scenes, we've still got quite a lot of work still to do. We've got the sustainability appraisal, the consultation statement. The question we are answering in the consultation statement is how has the feedback from Regulation 18 been used to finalise the policies? That's the statutory and legal test. The reports we've produced for Working Party pretty much answer those questions, so it's just a matter of time to take that text out and put it into the format of a consultation statement per policy and to outline to the inspector and to members of the public how we've used that feedback. It's a fairly big exercise still, though. We've got an update in habitat regulation assessments, which can only happen once we finalise the policies. So that will go on ahead in the background as well. We're doing some employment boundary reviews, which is just tidying up, looking at the boundaries of all the designated employment sites. And we're also got to have to produce the policies map, which is graphically illustrating the policies. So all that work is now starting and is going on behind the scenes. But what I really wanted to talk to you about was run past an approach to climate change past you to obtain your steer just before the work is undertaken, really. I don't want to do work that's unnecessary, but I would like your feedback. What I would say was much feedback of a plan has been based on the perception that the plan could be more upfront about the issues of climate change, especially since the council issued its declaration of climate change emergency following the previous publication. And I've had a conversation with the chair last year, giving a commitment that we would look at that or look at this, and we are at the stage where we obviously want to start to do that. In starting the discussion, it should be noted from the outset that we believe the emerging plan places significant emphasis on climate change from the beginning. It's a key issue. It's in the key issues and vision. It's core objective, and it's embedded throughout the policies, more so than any other plan this council has previously produced. In specifying that, planning's role is one of facilitation through mitigation, adaptation, and resilience. It forms part of the hierarchies set out in the NPPF to avoid, reduce, and at last resort compensate for adverse impacts from development. There's a statutory duty to address climate change in the national policy planning framework. But I have to emphasize that planning is not a panacea and cannot address climate change alone. The subject itself is broad and cross-cutting, incorporates impact on biodiversity, to carbon reduction, energy efficiency, supply. It broadly provides the justification for the settlement distribution. It helps others to direct their investment and produce their choices, but it's also dependent on technical change, innovation, and consumer choice. So addressing climate change is a shared responsibility, and planning can only set out a strategic framework and lay down the challenges. Delivery is definitely through partnership work, political buy-in, and the application of effective, coherent, and consistent decisions. But it also depends on others. That said, there is scope to alter the document to bring up, and by this I mean the layout of the document, and that's what I really want your opinion on, just so that the whole approach is clearer to the reader in the next edition of the plan, so they can see how the plan itself addresses climate change issues, adapts to climate change, and puts greater emphasis on at the beginning. I don't want to undertake the work if it's not what members are expecting, simply because altering the structure of the plan, moving policies around, that on the one hand creates extra work for us as officers. We have to have an audit trail. We have to clearly impacts on the SA and the HRA policies, and that sort of audit trail of the whole thing. We have to show how we've got from one end to the other. So it does mean extra work for us. But I've got two possible ways here. They are very, very draft. The best if I share my screen and illustrate them to you, and then we can have a discussion around them. So let me just bring up my screen, which hopefully you can tell me you can see that now.
Yeah, yes, I can see that, Ian.
Yeah. So what I'm proposing is, so I'm talking at the beginning of the plan here. So we've got setting out our key objectives of the plan, sustainable development and so forth, and making sure there's greater emphasis on climate change right from the beginning. And one way we think we can do this is through a specific climate change policy. It would be a strategic policy which would then just capture all the many other aspects that are throughout the plan already. So it just gives another bit of weight to saying, how are you addressing climate change? We can refer to it as a strategic policy, and then you go into the detail for the rest of it. I must stress what you're seeing here is just a brain dump by me. We really do need to discuss this as a team, but they're just for illustrations. And what you've got before me is either two policies, one policy that highlights how the plan mitigates climate change, and another one about adaptation to climate change and strengthening resilience. In reality, there's a lot of crossover between those two. So it may well be that if this is the approach you prefer, there would just be one policy, which says dealing with climate change, which I've called over on the second page here, sort of principles of development. So it would highlights where the plan is addressing climate change and how, which officers could then refer to. The second example of how we could potentially do that is to introduce something more of a table or a flow chart, which is basically illustrates very much upfront how the plan is addressing climate change. So you've got your principle of climate change, and these would be the policies where it is detailed within them. So you've got your low carbon development. You can see straight away you've got carbon reduction, design principles, energy efficiency, renewable and low carbon energy production, charging points. You've got raw materials in the natural environment. We've already got policies on biodiversity net gain, enhancements and protection of geodiversity, GI approaches, and we've got the recreation avoidance mitigation. So they're all contributing to it. We have policies on tree retention and planting, of course, and so forth. So hopefully you can get the idea that what I'm, these are two possible ways that we could beef up that front section of the plan. One is clearly more work than the other and has a few consequences down the line of further work for us. Or you might like both in, I don't know. They don't necessarily bring anything new to the show. They just highlight to the reader how the plan is seeking to do it. And I don't know if Mark wishes to say anything before I seek your views, essentially.
Well, personally, I mean, I think the scope for the addition of a strategic policy that deals directly with the impacts of climate change, or the impact mitigation of, combination of the that Ian illustrated in those two boxes, that encapsulates all the sort of high level principles, but converts those into policy requirements from which we then hang the rest of the plan off of. And I think the flow chart diagram is good, clear, explanatory text that would lead into that policy in the form of a sort of preamble to it. But I think that the one, I'm sure you will all universally agree to this, is we want to refocus the front end of the plan so that climate change is front and centre. Because one of the criticisms that we've had, and I think it's an unfair criticism, is the plan doesn't adequately address climate change. And to be frank, that's largely because people haven't bothered to read it. If they read the plan and understand how it works, then, everything that they ask for is actually covered in one place or another. How people, well, you'll read the representations yourself. The representation saying there should be electric charging points. We've got a policy on it. Representation saying there should be net biodiversity gain. We've got a policy on it. We've got, it's all in there, but it just needs drawing together. And if you like, the story painted in a clearer way at the outset, so people can see that that strategic direction then informs all the later policies. So I'll be absolutely, if any of you shake your head and say that's not a good idea. Sounds very sensible to me.
Right. Do you want to just remove that, Ian, so that everyone's visible on the screen, if you wouldn't mind, please? I think if I had to vote on this, I would say, can we please have both of them? Because we've got we have two target audiences, don't we? We have developers who are drilling down to the nitty-gritty, the merest detail. But the local plan is also intended, for the public at large as an audience. And we know that that the public at large do like things, simplifying as long as it's accurate. So I'm just wondering whether we can be a little bit greedy here, Ian, and perhaps have both. But I'm
after your steer of and they don't have to be either one of those. If anyone's got any other thoughts,
what is
into consideration.
What is absolutely clear is that climate change considerations needs to be a golden thread. As one judge once referred to the presumption of innocence in our legal system, it needs to be a golden thread that runs through our local plan from start to finish. It's arguably the most important aspect of the plan. Nigel, would you like to come in at this point?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Mark is quite right. If you go through the draft plan as it stands, there is a huge amount of environmental data in there and pledges towards climate change. But what I'm pleased to see this. It's something I wanted. I wanted people to really see us set out our stall right at the very beginning of this document and say this is what we're all about. And these are our pledges to you and to the climate. So I'm fully supportive, and like you, Councillor Brown, I think having the graphical representation alongside the wording is it's just helpful, and I thank officers once again for including it. It's really just so that it's in your face when you open the document. You can see right up front that what we're all about as a council. So as you say, Mark, you've done us proud with all the stuff you put in there, and Ian, of course, as well. So, but yeah, just to have it up front would be really good. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Councillor Pearce, would you like to come in?
Yes, I would. Thank you. I was going to say, I think Nigel Lloyd has said it, and yourself, plus that was the presentation. To have both may be a bit greedy, but this is about education. It's about educating everybody, whether you're a developer, whether you're a person just living in a house, you run a car, whether you're a designer of a car. It's about joined up handwriting to educate everybody at every opportunity. We can all say, well, we've got to do something about the climate. It's worse than that. We need to do something about it. And it might be revolutionary to the point that hopefully it becomes evolutionary. But the point is, we've got to educate everybody, and I can see nothing but benefit in having it as a core part of any plan. And the climate change opportunities, policies and actions will drive our development plan. It's a case of getting this joined up writing. So that's all I was going to say. We need to educate, make it easy to see, easy to look, and easy to review and comprehend. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for those marks. Needs to be user friendly. Can I defer to Councillor Virginia Gay and then to Councillor Mancini Boyle?
Thank you, Chairman. I was just going to say, in an ideal world, you'd think that people who cared passionately about something would be willing to read a document, but we're not in an ideal world, and I'm afraid that we need both approaches. We need the strategic overarching policy clearly expressed at the beginning of the document, and then the flow chart will allow people who just are looking for one thing to navigate their way through, I think. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Mancini Boyle, and then I'll come to Mark.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just a few observations, really. I've been very interested with all the information I've been given today. One phrase that did quite concern me was, call me an old skeptic if you like, but I wasn't too impressed with what Ian said about the builders have to tell the officers what their plans are for what they're going to do to address the carbon issues. I feel that should be, call me skeptic, but I think it should be led by local government and officers to tell them what should be doing. A second point really is, as everyone knows, I'm a massive fan of heat source pumps and passive homes. These are things that are currently available. Do the officers have the appetite to increase the carbon neutrality by bringing these type of things in? And third point really is, as you all know, 2025, you won't be able to buy a gas boiler, so they'll be phased out probably a long time before that, which will mean heat source pumps and solar and wind will probably be readily available before then. It's just a problem I have. Instead of us always relying on government and building controls and things like that, do you sometimes think that we should maybe take a bit of a steer on this, a lead on it, and try and do more than perhaps we're expected? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Do either Ian or Mark want to, I know you want to come in, Mark, to address those points.
I just clarify that remark I made, if I may, Chair, about the
certainly.
Developers. What I was requiring was, from the feedback, a lot of the developers actually said they didn't want to provide the council with how they would achieve the information about how they would achieve the energy efficiency. They use the argument that its policy is placing onerous and costly demands on them, and they shouldn't tell the officers how they're going to achieve that. If we don't know how they're going to achieve it, how can we condition the permission to do so? So I clarified within the policy that it's up to the developer to provide a separate document, or in fact, I don't mind if it's a separate document or it is in the design and access statement, setting out how they will achieve the policy ambition. And there's clearly very different options of how they can do that, depending on the site and the number of units and so forth, many variable factors. So instead of us trawling through the applications, trying to pick up little bits of information, they need to put it in one place so that officers, determining officers, and then member committees can see how they are going to achieve the policy. Just being transparent. That's what I meant by that point.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Do you have anything to add at this point, Mark?
Yeah, I was just going to make a general point about the nature of the next version of the plan and contrast it a little bit with the Regulation 18 version. So there will be a need to sort of redraft and recast the plan and use slightly different language, because it's this plan that ultimately becomes the adopted policy document. So the point that Nigel was making about sort of education is probably truer of the Regulation 18 consultation version, because in that Regulation 18 consultation version, you were explaining the options and the evidence in a more sort of discussive sort of way, and then presenting your draft policies. Whereas the new plan, we've got to have an eye to the fact that that plan will be, on a planning officer's shelf in 10 years' time, and will be used for defending appeals and decisions which the council makes. So rather than being sort of discussive and explaining, the sort of text in it will be more along the lines of what we call reasoned justifications, which obviously refers to the evidence and uses the evidence to then arrive at the policies. The more sort of educational stuff, if you like, will be reserved to the background papers. So we publish a lot of background papers alongside the document, which has got much more in the way of sort of discussion and options and analysis in, that won't feature in the plan itself, because it'd be superfluous when the plan is sort of finally adopted. And there's a balance to be struck between, that quite what goes in and what doesn't. The point to me is, when you look at policies in themselves, you then have to interpret them. And the reason justification in the plan should tell you how to interpret the policy. What was its intent? What was it trying to deliver? And that's the key message, that, when you as a development committee, if you're on a development committee, sit down, you'll often read the policy, but it's as important that you read the reason, justification, and what the policy is aiming to do. So I just wanted to make that point, that the plan will be written and you've sort of given me delegated powers as we've gone along to sort of make these changes, it'll be written in a slightly different way because it's serving a slightly different purpose. It is the examination plan. It's not a sort of true consultation document with lots of alternative options alluded to and lots of appraisal in it. So I just wanted to make.
Do we know if we're going to be producing a sort of an online version, and whether the format needs to take account of an online version where you might have an interactive index, for example, that people can cross-refer quite easily?
Yeah, I'm not even sure we'll even bother producing a paper version, to be honest, Chair. I suspect we will have to do both. But, you know, the core strategy, we printed 2,500 copies of the core strategy. We won't be doing that this time. The next round of consultation will be largely electronically based. And the new plan will be produced in a format which is sort of digitized and templated and much more navigable around, you know, website use. I dare say, you know, mindful of the sort of population we're serving, and dare I say, the age of the people on the development committee, will probably want to have some paper copies available for some people. Have to do a bit of a hybrid.
Yeah, the age of paper is not yet dead, I'm pleased to say. Can I move to Councillor John Toy? Been waiting patiently, John.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, just go back to Ian's original question about, you know, do we want it, don't we want it? I believe, yes, that we do need to have something in front to set out our stall. I'm kind of torn on the two options he's shown, but can't at this moment in time offer an alternative. But because the initial layout, you know, fits with the way we've got everything else laid out within our policies. But I kind of like the graphic, you know, what are we doing about this? What are we doing about that? And there's the policies. So I wonder if there's you know, room for manoeuvring because it's in the front and not in the policy section, for it to just look slightly different so that it's presented in a much more balanced way, as people have said, both for, you know, the general public and for developers, so that maybe we can have those titles, but with a bit more detail in the sayings in the arrows. I don't know, but I definitely think we need something. And yeah, but I'm not being very helpful in terms of I'm not sure how best to present it. But obviously we you know, we can discuss that, and of course, as Mark rightly says, we often give that authority to Mark to do that. So maybe if they listen to our stuff and talk to the chair and then decide if we need to bring it back to committee or if it's something that fits with what we've discussed here today. So yeah, sorry, some that's not unhelpful, but at least it reinforces, I hope, that we do need to do something to set out our stall at the beginning.
Yep.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, John, for that. That's helpful. Sorry, Ian. Over to you.
I was just going to say what I put up there was just a bit of a brain dump, just to get your opinions. We obviously, as a team, need to discuss, and once we've had that opportunity, we'll produce something and run it past you.
Councillor Clive Stockton, can I refer to you?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I'm interested in this idea of ageism and paper, but absolutely, I think it is essential in this day and age that there is a graphic representation as a summary. That's what people notice. They'll skip over paragraphs of print without even registering what's in it. It will need to be printed, but a graphic representation of what it's trying to do, I think in this day and age, is absolutely essential.
Thank you for that. In terms of wrapping this up, Ian, do you want any form of resolution from us here and now, or are you happy?
No, it was just a discussion item, just to seek your members' opinions. So I think we've got that steer. So
okay,
yeah, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay. I think we've covered that now. We're just coming up to the 2-hour mark, actually. So I think moving on to the remaining items, which I don't think need detain us very long. There's no discretionary business that I have under item 11. We've got no press and public present, so no need for anything under item 12, and we've no exempt matters or business arising under items 13 and 14. So that, I think, probably deals with the agenda this morning. I'd just like to say thank you to everybody, in particular to our two councillors who have at short notice agreed to substitute for the members who could not attend due to other commitments. To thank our officers for putting the reports together, who are working extremely well on the local plan. I'm hoping that I will not be shouted down when I say hopefully we will be going to consultation under Reg 19 circa July or thereabouts. We're certainly open to delegating some of the perhaps less controversial or complex policies to you without the need to bring everything to the working party. I'm sure that we can accommodate you in that, if it means that we get to Reg 19 when hopefully we're timetabled to do later in the year. So on that note, I think we can conclude